Welcome back to the table. As always, I'm your host, Chad Tafts. This episode is supported by MK Army Heal Energy, a founding partner of the Roundtable for Men, built for long days and real work. Fuel the fearless. Last episode, we talked about being a stay at home dad. We talked about how our worth isn't determined by a paycheck, a job title, or what other people think a man should be. We talked about showing up for our families, serving the people that we love, and learning that sometimes the greatest things we'll ever build won't be found on a resume. They'll be found in the memories we leave behind. But today, I want to have a different conversation, one that's been sitting on my heart for a long time. Because if there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that relationships can be complicated. Some relationships seem effortless, others take work every single day. Some grow stronger with time, others slowly drift apart. And sometimes the people we love the most become the people we're the furthest away from. If I'm being honest, this wasn't an easy episode to write. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wasn't sure if I should say it. I never want this podcast to become a place where I air out family problems. That's not why we're here. We're here to learn, to grow, and hopefully to become better men. But every once in a while, life gives us lessons that are too important to keep to ourselves. Today's lesson comes from one of the most important relationships in my life, my relationship with my dad. Now, before we go any further, I need you to hear me. This isn't an episode about blaming him. This isn't an episode about proving that I'm right. Because if that's all this conversation becomes, then we've missed the point. This episode is about something much bigger than the two of us. It's about what happens when yesterday has more influence over a relationship than today. It's about the weight we carry, the hurt we refuse to let go, the conversations that never happen, and the years that quietly slip away while everyone waits for somebody else to make the first move. I don't have all the answers. Honestly, I'm still walking through this myself. But maybe that's exactly why this conversation matters. Because I have a feeling I'm not the only one. Maybe you're thinking about a relationship with your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, a friend, or maybe even one of your own kids. Maybe there's someone you haven't talked to in years. Maybe every time you think about reaching out, something stops you. Or maybe you're the one somebody else has been waiting on. So today, I don't want to tell you who's right. I don't want to tell you who's wrong. I just want us to ask an honest question. What happens when we allow one moment from the past to steal years from our future? So come on in, get comfortable, and pull up a chair. When I think about my dad, the first thing that comes to mind isn't anger, it's respect, it's admiration, it's love. My dad worked hard, really hard growing up. I never questioned whether he was willing to provide for his family. He taught me what responsibility looked like. He showed me that being a man meant getting up, going to work, and doing what needed to be done, whether you felt like it or not. There were no shortcuts, no excuses. If something needed to be done, you got it done. A lot of the work ethic I have today, the discipline I try to live with, the desire to take care of my family, I learned all that by watching him. Some lessons aren't taught with words, they're taught by example. And whether he realizes it or not, he gave me a lot of those examples. For that, I'll always be grateful. That's why this conversation affects me as much as it does. Because this isn't about a man I dislike. It's about a man I've always respected. Those are two very different things. But as I got older, I started picturing what our relationship might look like as adults. Not because I expected it to be perfect. No family is perfect. But I hoped we'd spend more time together. I'd hoped we'd have more conversations that weren't rushed. I hoped my kids would grow up making memories with their grandpa. I imagined birthdays, family dinners, stopping by just to visit, calling each other for no particular reason, just because we wanted to talk. Those are the kinds of relationships I had always hoped to have. Instead, it feels like we got stuck. About 8 years ago, something happened involving my wife and I, and I'm not going to get into what happened, not because I'm trying to avoid it, but because that's not the point of today's conversation. The point is what happened afterward. From where I stand, it feels like the moment is still standing between us, like there's an invisible wall that neither one of us has figured out how to walk around. Life has continued. We've both gotten older. My kids have grown. There have been birthdays, Christmases, family milestones, ordinary Tuesdays that could have become great memories. And 8 years is a long time. A lot can happen in 8 years. A lot of life can be lived. And sometimes I catch myself wondering how many opportunities quietly passed us by while we both kept moving in opposite directions. Maybe he doesn't see it that way. Maybe if he were sitting in the chair, he would tell a different story. And honestly, that's okay. Because again, this episode isn't about deciding whose version is right. It's about acknowledging that sometimes two people can experience the same history and carry it very differently. All I know is what it feels like from where I sit. And from where I stand, it feels like one moment became bigger than every moment that came after it. And that's a hard thing to wrestle with because every year that passes, the distance doesn't just stay the same, it grows. Not all at once, but little by little. One missed conversation, one missed holiday, one missed opportunity at a time. And eventually, you wake up and you realize years have gone by. Not because you stopped caring, but because everything from yesterday kept tomorrow from ever having a chance. And that's the question I've been asking myself. Can one moment become so big that it hides every moment that comes after it? Here's the thing, I know my story isn't unique. I honestly think every one of us has a relationship that's been shaped by something that's happened years ago. Maybe it was betrayal. Maybe it was words that never should have been said. Maybe it was an argument that spiraled out of control. Maybe someone broke your heart. Maybe someone broke your trust. Or maybe someone just simply disappeared when you needed them the most. The details are different, but the feeling is something a lot of us understand. The hard part is pain has a way of convincing us that holding on to it keeps us safe. It tells us if you don't let your guard down, you'll never get hurt again. And maybe for a while that feels true. Maybe the distance protects you. Maybe it keeps you from having another difficult conversation. Maybe it saves you from another disappointment. But eventually, you have to ask yourself, what is the protection costing you? Because carrying hurt is exhausting. Not because the hurt wasn't real. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm not saying you should pretend it never existed. Some wounds deserve time. Some betrayals cut deep. Some relationships are changed forever. That's reality. But pain is heavy, and the longer we carry it, the heavier it becomes. It starts showing up in places we never expected. We become more guarded, more suspicious, less willing to trust, less willing to hope, and sometimes we stop expecting people to disappoint us because we've already convinced ourselves in our mind that they will. And before we know it, we're not just carrying one painful memory anymore. We're carrying the fear that every relationship will end the same way. And that's a heavy way to live because eventually the hurt stops being something that happened to us. It starts becoming part of who we believe we are. And I've caught myself doing it. Maybe you have too. That's why I think we need to stop every once in a while and ask ourselves a difficult question. Are you carrying a memory or is the memory carrying you? When it comes to relationships of any kind, I think one of the biggest lies we believe is that healthy relationships should always be easy. The reality is, they aren't. Every meaningful relationship will eventually ask something from you. Sometimes it asks for your pride. Sometimes it asks for humility. Sometimes it asks you to be the first one to pick up the phone, even when you don't think you should have to. Sometimes it asks you to listen instead of defend yourself, to seek understanding instead of trying to win. And if I'm honest, that's hard because pride is comfortable. Pride tells us if they wanted a relationship, they know where to find me. If they cared, they would have called. If they were sorry, they would say it. Maybe that's true. Maybe it isn't. But here's what I know, pride has never repaired a relationship. Pride waits, humility moves, grace, excuse me, grace moves, forgiveness moves. None of those things guarantee reconciliation, but they create the possibility of it. And that's the cost of relationships. Not because the other person earned it, not because they deserve it, but because relationships don't grow without sacrifice, whether it's a marriage, a friendship, a parent, or one of your own children. At some point, love asks something from us. Sometimes it asks us to swallow our pride. It asks us to have an uncomfortable conversation. And sometimes it simply asks us to show up. The question isn't whether relationships cost anything. They always do. The real question is, What is your pride costing you today? This might be the hardest lesson I've been learning. Acceptance. It isn't the same thing as agreement. Accepting what happened doesn't mean saying it was okay. Forgiveness isn't the same thing as trust. You can forgive someone and still recognize that the trust has to be built. Letting go doesn't mean pretending the past never happened. It happened. You can't erase it. Neither can I. What we can do is decide whether we're going to let the moment define every moment after it. Because here's the truth, you can acknowledge that someone hurt you without allowing that hurt to define every future interaction. That's something I'm struggling with right now. The reality is that things can damage the relationship and cause a divide. But there's also the reality that we can acknowledge the hurt and we can make the conscious decision to not allow it to affect every future interaction. You can recognize the pain without making it your identity. And I'm still learning that myself. There are days when it's easier than others. There are days when I think maybe things could be different. And then there are other days where the distance feels just as big as it ever was. Healing is never a straight line. Neither is forgiveness. Neither is rebuilding relationships. Some days you take 2 steps forward. Some days it feels like you've taken 3 steps back. But I don't want to spend the rest of my life believing that yesterday gets the final word. Because if I do, then the past wins. And I don't want to give the past that kind of power. I don't know what tomorrow looks like. I don't know what my relationship with my dad looks like 5 years from now. I hope it's different. I truly do. But if it changes or not, I want to make sure that my heart isn't trapped in a moment that's already gone. Because holding on to yesterday doesn't stop time, it only stops us. So maybe the real question is, we all, is holding on to the past protecting you or is it imprisoning you? Before we move on, I want you to forget about my story for just a minute. Think about your own. Is there someone that came to mind while you've been listening today? Maybe it's your dad, maybe it's your mom, maybe it's your brother, maybe it's your sister or your son or your daughter, or maybe it's just someone else who used to be one of your closest friends. Maybe someone hurt you years ago. Maybe they said something they can't take back. Maybe they walked away. Maybe they chose someone else over you. Maybe they never apologized. Maybe they don't even think they did something wrong. And if that's your story, I want you to know something. Your hurt is real. I'm not asking you to pretend it isn't, but I do want to ask you something. How much of your future are you willing to give away because of your past? How many birthdays? How many holidays? How many conversations? How many memories? How many opportunities to say I love you before one of you isn't here anymore? Because the truth is, none of us know how much time we have left. None of us know when the last conversation will be. None of us know when it will be the last hug or the last chance to make things right. And then I want to flip that question. Maybe you're the one someone else has been waiting on. Maybe you've been waiting for them to make the first move while they've been waiting for you. Maybe you've convinced yourself that they don't care, when the reality is they're just as scared as you are. I don't know your story, but I do know this. Someone has to decide that the relationship is worth fighting for. Somebody has to make that first move. All right, now let's get back to the conversation. Here's what gives me hope. Not every relationship is over. Sometimes relationships aren't broken beyond repair, they're just neglected. Life gets busy, people get stubborn, years pass, and before long, that silence becomes normal. Sometimes the relationship isn't ending, it's just waiting. Waiting for someone to interrupt that distance. Now, does that guarantee everything will be okay? No, not even close. One phone call doesn't erase years of hurt. One apology doesn't rebuild trust overnight. One conversation doesn't magically fix everything, but it can begin something. Healing rarely starts with some incredible speech. Most of the time, it starts with someone simply saying, "Can we talk?" or "I miss you." Well, those aren't complicated words, but they can be incredibly courageous. Because reaching out means accepting that you might not get the response you were hoping for. That's scary. Rejection hurts. Silence hurts. But you know what else hurts? always wondering what would have happened if you had tried. I'd rather live with the disappointment of trying than the regret of never having tried at all. Because even if reconciliation doesn't happen, at least I'll know didn't let my fear make the decision for me. Sometimes courage isn't winning the conversation. Sometimes it's just simply being willing to start it. Now I'm going to be honest about something else, because not every story ends the way we hope. Sometimes you make the call, sometimes you send the message, sometimes you apologize, sometimes you forgive, and nothing changes. That hurts. It really does. Because we all want happy endings. But relationships involve two people. You can't force someone to answer the phone. You can't force someone to forgive. You can't force someone to rebuild trust. You can't force someone to want a relationship they aren't ready for. As painful as that is, it's also free because it reminds us that not everything is within our control. We are responsible for our actions, our attitude, our character, our willingness to love people well, but we aren't responsible for someone else's choices. That realization changed the way that I started looking at my own life. Instead of asking, how do I make someone else change? I started asking, what kind of a man am I becoming through this? Because even if the relationship never becomes what I hope it'll be, I don't want the disappointment to make me bitter. I don't want her to become my identity. I don't want one painful chapter to write the rest of my story. I want to become the kind of man who leaves that door open, who chooses grace over resentment, who can honestly say, I did what I could. And sometimes that's enough. So here's your challenge this week. Don't just listen to this episode, do something with it. Think about one relationship, just one. Ask yourself, is there someone I need to forgive? Is there someone I owe an apology? Is there someone I've been avoiding because it's easier than having a difficult conversation? Is there someone I've convinced myself doesn't want to hear from me without ever giving them a chance? Maybe your first step is making a phone call. Maybe it's sending a text. Maybe it's writing a letter you'll never send just to finally put your thoughts into words. Maybe your first step is simply deciding that you don't want the past to have as much control over your future anymore. Whatever it is, take that step. Not because you're guaranteed the outcome you want, but because healing almost never starts with a perfect conversation. It starts with someone making a decision to stop waiting, a decision to stop keeping score, a decision to believe that relationships are worth fighting for. One step, one conversation, one act of courage. Sometimes that's all it takes to begin. As we wrap up today's conversation, I want to go back to where we started. My dad. I don't know what the future of our relationship looks like. I wish I did. I wish I could tell you that by the time you're listening to this episode, everything has been repaired. That we had the conversation, that we moved past everything, that we're making up for lost time. But I can't, because life doesn't always give us endings that tie everything together with a nice little bow. Sometimes we're still living the story. And that's where I find myself today. I still love my dad. I still respect him. I still appreciate the man he taught me to become. And I still hope that one day we have the relationship I've always wanted us to have. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. I honestly don't know. But what I do know is that I don't want to spend the rest of my life becoming bitter because things didn't turn out the way I hoped. Bitterness has a way of convincing us it's protecting us, but most of the time, it just keeps us stuck. I'd rather leave the door open, not because I know someone will walk through it, but because I don't want to be the one who locked it. And maybe that's where this episode really ends. Not with certainty, not with all the answers, but with a choice. A choice to keep our hearts open, a choice to keep growing, a choice to refuse to let one chapter become the entire story. Because relationships are too valuable and life is too short to let yesterday steal every tomorrow. Thank you for pulling up a chair with me today. If this conversation meant something to you, I'd encourage you to share it with someone who might need to hear it. You never know what one conversation, one phone call, or one small act of courage might begin. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and keep pulling up a chair. I'll see you next time at the Roundtable for Men. Oh, and Dad, if you're listening to this and watching this, I love you. I miss you, and I do everything that I do to honor you and to try to make you proud.